The Thompson submachine gun weighs heavier in Jake McNiece's hands than it did 6 hours ago, when the scattered remnants of the filthy 13 first spotted the stone bridge at Pont-au-Phars through the pre-dawn fog. Now, with German voices echoing across the water and the distinctive growl of panzer engines somewhere in the distance, the weapon feels like an anchor dragging him toward the bottom of a very deep hole. McNiece shifts his position against the crumbling farmhouse wall, feeling the rough stone catch on his torn jump jacket. The mission briefing had made it sound simple enough. Drop near the village, locate the bridge, plant charges on the main supports, and deny the crossing to German armor heading toward Utah Beach. What they hadn't mentioned was the scattered drop that left half his men missing, the Wehrmacht patrol that arrived an hour after they reached the target, or the fact that most of their explosives now lay somewhere in a flooded field 3 miles away. "Sarge, that MG-42's got the whole approach covered," whispers Private Kowalski, his shoulder still seeping blood from the grenade fragments he caught an hour earlier. "Can't get within 50 yards of those supports without getting chewed up." And McNiece studies the bridge through his cracked field glasses, noting the way the morning light catches the steel reinforcement beams beneath the ancient stonework. The structure has carried traffic for centuries, surviving everything from Roman legions to Napoleon's retreat. Now 12 scattered American paratroopers are supposed to bring it down with whatever explosives they can scrounge from their jump gear and salvaged equipment. The irony isn't lost on him. Back in England, the brass had made it clear they considered the filthy 13 a collection of misfits and troublemakers, useful for impossible missions precisely because they had nothing left to lose. Now those same officers were counting on McNiece's talent for improvisation to cut German supply lines in the Norman countryside, using methods that would horrify anyone who believed in following regulations. Behind him, Corporal Bainbridge methodically strips and cleans his M1 rifle for the 3rd time in an hour. The repetitive motion seems to calm his nerves, though his hands still shake slightly when he thinks no one is watching. McNiece recognizes the signs. Bainbridge hasn't been the same since watching their radio operator take 3 rounds through the chest from a sniper's Mauser. Some men break loud with screaming and panic. Others break quiet, retreating into ritual and routine while their minds try to process what they've seen. "What's left in the satchel?" McNiece asks, though he already knows the answer. 2 blocks of composition explosive, barely enough to damage 1 support beam if placed correctly. A length of detonation cord that might reach the target if he's careful with every inch. 3 blasting caps in a dented cigarette tin, their brass casings tarnished but still functional. The original plan had called for systematic demolition of all 4 main supports, bringing down the entire span in a controlled collapse. Now they're looking at surgical placement of minimal charges, hoping to weaken the structure enough that the first heavy tank will finish what their explosives started. It's the kind of calculated gamble that separates successful demolition men from those who end up scattered across the landscape in small pieces. Through the morning haze, McNiece can make out German soldiers moving between prepared positions on both sides of the crossing. They're not going anywhere, which means his scattered squad has maybe 2 hours before enemy reinforcements arrive in strength. 2 hours to figure out how to get close enough to plant charges that might or might not bring down a bridge that's been standing since his grandfather's grandfather was born. The Thompson jams again as he tests the action, its bolt frozen with Normandy mud and cordite residue. McNiece slams it against the wall with practiced frustration, wondering how many other things are going to fail before this day is over. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. The German machine gun position changes everything. From his observation post in the farmhouse attic, McNiece watches the enemy crew adjust their MG-42's field of fire, systematically covering every approach to the bridge's eastern supports. They're professionals, Wehrmacht regulars, not the green conscripts they'd been told to expect in this sector of Normandy. They've got at least 12 men down there, Kowalski reports, wincing as he shifts position to favor his wounded shoulder. Maybe more in those stone buildings on the far side. Saw movement in the church tower too. McNiece nods, studying the tactical situation through his field glasses. The briefing maps had shown scattered resistance, mostly rear echelon troops and local security units. Instead, they're facing what looks like a reinforced patrol with prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire. Someone in the German command structure had the same idea about this bridge's importance. The fog that concealed their approach is starting to burn off, revealing details that make McNiece's stomach tighten. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, leading to camouflage positions. Communication wires strung between buildings. The methodical placement of weapons that speaks to hours of preparation, not hasty improvisation. Bainbridge, what do you see from your angle? Bainbridge looks up from his rifle, blinking as if surprised to hear his name. Stone retaining wall runs maybe 30 yards along the water, he says slowly. Good cover if you could reach it, but that machine gun sweeps the whole area every few minutes. McNiece pulls out his pocket watch, timing the German patrol pattern. They're disciplined but predictable, rotating sentries every 20 minutes, concentrating their observation on the main approaches. It's textbook defensive doctrine, which means there might be gaps a man could exploit if he was willing to take some serious risks. The sound of engines grows louder from the east, German armor, still distant but closing. McNiece estimates maybe 90 minutes before the first tanks reach the bridge approach. After that, his scattered squad won't matter much. 12 paratroopers with small arms can't stop a panzer column, no matter how stubborn they are. Sarge been thinking about them charges, Kowalski says quietly. That composition explosive. If we could get it against the right beam, might not need to bring down the whole span. Just weaken it enough that the first heavy vehicle... I know. McNiece's mind is already working through the angles, calculating blast effects and structural weak points. The bridge's main supports are steel-reinforced concrete, probably built to carry heavy traffic during peacetime. But even the strongest structure has vulnerable points, where carefully placed charges can create catastrophic failure. The problem isn't technical, it's tactical. Getting close enough to plant the charges means crossing 40 yards of open ground under direct observation from multiple firing positions. Even if they created a diversion, drew German attention elsewhere, someone would have to make that run with explosives strapped to his back and hope the detonation cord reached far enough to avoid being caught in the blast. Private Morrison crawls up from the ground floor, his face pale with exhaustion and something deeper. Spotted movement in them woods across the river, he reports. Looked like more infantry, maybe a company's worth. They're setting up some kind of roadblock position. McNiece closes his eyes, feeling the weight of command settle across his shoulders like a wet wool blanket. Command hadn't prepared him for this. The isolation of being the man everyone looked to for solutions when there weren't any good options left. The army had trained him to blow things up, not to make life and death decisions for men who trusted him to find a way out of impossible situations. The TNT satchel sits in the corner like an accusation, its canvas straps dark with moisture from the Norman morning. 2 pounds of explosive that might save the mission or kill everyone trying to place it. In 6 years of demolition work, from Oklahoma oil fields to army training grounds, McNiece had never been responsible for anything more consequential than clearing stumps and building foundations. Now the brass was asking him to gamble with lives on the chance that his improvised solution might delay German armor long enough to matter in a battle whose scope he couldn't even comprehend. The radio crackles to life just after 800 hours, bringing news that makes everything worse. Static-filled reports from other drop zones paint a picture of scattered units, missed objectives, and mounting casualties across the Normandy Peninsula. Half the bridges assigned to airborne demolition teams remain intact. German armor is moving faster than anyone expected. Dog Company got chewed up bad at Sainte-Mère-Église, the distant voice reports. lost most of their explosives in the drop. Requesting immediate resupply and reinforcement, McNiece exchanges glances with Bainbridge, seeing his own thoughts reflected in the corporal's tired eyes. If Dog Company, a full-strength unit with proper equipment, couldn't handle their assigned bridge, what chance did 12 scattered men have with salvaged explosives and improvised tactics? The German voices across the water grow more animated as enemy reinforcements continue arriving. McNiece watches through his field glasses as fresh troops take positions along the far bank, their movements coordinated and professional. These aren't the demoralized garrison troops they'd been briefed to expect. These are combat veterans who know their business. Maybe we should pull back, Morrison suggests quietly. Link up with other units, try again with proper support. It's a reasonable suggestion that makes tactical sense. Withdrawal, reorganization, coordinated assault with adequate resources. By-the-book military thinking that would satisfy any court of inquiry. Asked to investigate why 12 paratroopers didn't accomplish what a company of engineers would find challenging. But retreat means leaving the bridge intact for German armor columns that are already moving. It means American infantry on the beaches facing panzer support that should have been delayed or denied entirely. It means accepting that sometimes the mission fails because the situation on the ground doesn't match the neat lines drawn on maps back in England. McNiece hefts the TNT satchel, feeling its weight against his palm. The leather straps are cracked from hard use, the canvas stained with oil and sweat from previous operations. Inside, 2 blocks of composition explosive represent weeks of careful allocation by supply officers who calculated demolition requirements down to individual ounces. He remembers his first demolition instructor back in Oklahoma, an old mining engineer who'd lost 2 fingers to a premature blast. "Son, explosives don't care about your plans or your problems," the man had said. "They just do what chemistry and physics tell them to do. Your job is to put them where physics can solve the problem. Chemistry can't." The bridge's main support beam runs directly beneath the roadway, accessible from the stone retaining wall if a man could reach it without being cut down by machine gun fire. The steel reinforcement provides the structure's primary load-bearing capacity. Damage it sufficiently, and the first heavy vehicle would complete the demolition through simple mechanical stress. "Kowalski, how's that shoulder holding up?" McNiece asks. "Good enough to fight, Sarge. Good enough to run if I have to." "Bainbridge?" The corporal looks up from his rifle, something flickering behind his eyes that might be hope or might be resignation. "Whatever you're thinking, I'm with you. We all are." It's the kind of simple declaration that makes command both precious and terrible. These men will follow him into whatever half-insane plan he devises, not because they believe it will work, but because they trust him to give them a chance. The weight of that trust feels heavier than any explosive he's ever carried. German tank engines grow louder from the east, their rumble carrying across the Norman countryside like approaching thunder. Time is running out for careful planning and measured decisions. Soon it will be time for the kind of desperate improvisation that either creates legends or casualties. McNiece checks his pocket watch one more time, calculating distances, timing, and the mathematics of blast effects. Somewhere in those numbers lies a solution that might save the mission and the men who depend on him finding it. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The plan forms in McNiece's mind like a controlled explosion, sudden, devastating, and probably insane. He'll create a diversion at the bridge's western approach, while Kowalski and Morrison circle south through the drainage ditches. When the German machine gun shifts to engage the threat it can see, someone has exactly 90 seconds to reach the eastern support beam and plant the charges. "Who's making the run?" Bainbridge asks, though they all know the answer. "I am." McNiece shoulders the TNT satchel, feeling its weight settle against his back like a familiar burden. You three keep their heads down until I signal. Then you run like hell and don't look back. The detonation cord stretches exactly 42 feet, just enough to reach from the support beam to the cover of the stone retaining wall, with maybe 3 feet to spare if McNiece doesn't waste any length on careful routing. He's calculated the blast radius twice, checking his math against bitter experience with composition explosive in confined spaces. At 0847 hours, McNiece makes his move. The Thompson chatters in controlled bursts as he advances along the western approach, drawing immediate response from the German positions. Muzzle flashes bloom in windows and doorways as the enemy concentrate their fire on the visible threat. Exactly as he'd hoped. The machine gun's distinctive buzzsaw rhythm fills the air as its crew traverses to engage, their weapons spitting death in measured bursts. McNiece counts the seconds, timing his movement to the mechanical rhythm of reloads and target acquisition. Somewhere to his left, Kowalski's M1 rifle adds its voice to the firefight. Then McNiece is running, the TNT satchel bouncing against his spine as he sprints across open ground toward the bridge's eastern support. 40 yards of bullet-swept earth that stretches like an eternity under the Norman morning sun. His boots slip on wet stone as he reaches the retaining wall. German voices shouting alarm behind him. The steel beam feels cold and solid under his hands as McNiece strips the charges from their satchel. 2 blocks of composition explosive pressed against the beam's base where maximum structural damage will result from minimum blast effect. The blasting cap slides home with a metallic click that sounds unnaturally loud above the gunfire. Detonation cord unspools behind him as McNiece retreats to minimum safe distance, his movements automatic despite the chaos erupting around the bridge. Bullets spark off stone and steel, but the German fire is confused, uncoordinated. They know someone is near their primary defensive position but can't locate the exact threat. McNiece reaches the retaining wall with 8 feet of cord to spare, enough for adequate cover if the blast performs as calculated. His thumb finds the plunger's safety switch, completing the firing circuit that will send electrical current through 42 feet of detonation cord to the blasting caps pressed against Pont du Far's bridge. For one crystalline moment, time seems suspended. McNiece can hear German officers shouting orders, American rifles answering from multiple positions, the distant rumble of approaching armor that makes this entire desperate gamble necessary. His hand trembles slightly on the plunger, not from fear, but from the weight of consequences that will flow from this single decision. The explosion, when it comes, exceeds every calculation. Steel screams as the support beam buckles, stone dust billowing into the morning air as 2,000 years of engineering suddenly discover the limits of structural integrity. The bridge doesn't collapse. It settles, sagging like a tired old man finally accepting the weight of accumulated years. But it holds, damaged, weakened, compromised, but still standing. McNiece stares through the settling dust at what should have been complete destruction, his mind racing through blast equations and structural analysis. The charges were placed correctly, the timing perfect, the explosive sufficient for the calculated effect. By every measure he understands, the bridge should be lying in pieces across the Norman riverbed. Instead, it stands wounded but functional, capable of carrying infantry and light vehicles, but perhaps not the heavy armor whose engines grow louder with each passing minute. McNiece has achieved partial success in a mission that demanded total completion. The kind of tactical ambiguity that makes after-action reports read like fiction and haunts demolition men for decades. The German return fire intensifies as enemy soldiers realize what just happened. Machine gun bullets probe the retaining wall, seeking the man who dared to attack their primary defensive position. McNiece clutches the empty TNT satchel, its canvas now useless weight, and wonders if partial victory will prove worse than honest failure. The secret Jake McNiece will carry for the rest of his life has nothing to do with heroism or tactical brilliance. It's simpler and more terrible than that. For exactly 3 seconds after the charges detonated, he considered running toward the damaged bridge, with the few grenades remaining in his equipment, hoping to finish the job through suicidal desperation. 3 seconds of pure, terror-driven calculation, wondering if his partial failure would cost more American lives than his certain death might save. 3 seconds of staring at the wounded but standing bridge, and feeling the weight of every armored vehicle that might still cross it, because Jake McNiece hadn't carried enough explosives or placed them precisely right. The moment passed when Kowalski's voice cut through the aftermath, shouting coordinates for German positions across the water. Training and brotherhood reasserted themselves over the dark mathematics of sacrifice. McNiece found himself moving toward his men instead of toward the bridge, choosing survival and tactical withdrawal over the grand gesture that might redeem his incomplete success. But those 3 seconds would return in dreams for decades afterward. Not the explosion, not the gunfire, not even the faces of friends lost in other actions. Just that crystalline moment when Jake McNiece seriously considered whether his mission failure justified throwing his life away in a final desperate attempt at completion. "Sarge, we need to move," Morrison calls from 30 yards away. "More Germans coming up from the south, maybe a full platoon." McNiece shoulders the empty satchel and begins his withdrawal. German bullets tracking his movement along the stone wall. The bridge stands behind him like an accusation, its damaged supports visible through the clearing smoke. 50% success in a mission that demanded 100% completion. The kind of tactical ambiguity that will read well in citations but feel like failure to the man who planted the charges. The retreat to American lines takes 4 hours through Norman hedgerows and abandoned farmyards, carrying Kowalski when his wounded shoulder gives out completely. They link up with elements of the 506th PIR just before noon, reporting to a captain whose maps already show the bridge at Pontufars, marked with a question mark, damaged but not destroyed, tactical value uncertain. "What's your assessment of structural integrity?" the captain asks, stylus poised over his acetate-covered map. McNiece stares at the neat symbols representing his morning's work, trying to translate lived experience into the clean language of military reports. How does he explain the sound steel makes when it bends beyond its design limits? How does he quantify the difference between destroyed and merely damaged when German armor is already probing the approaches? "Bridge is compromised but standing," he finally reports. "Will carry infantry and light vehicles. Uncertain about heavy armor, depends on load distribution and structural redundancy." The captain makes notations in the margin of his map, reducing McNiece's morning to abbreviated tactical symbols. Somewhere in those markings lies the bridge that Jake McNiece couldn't quite destroy, the mission he couldn't quite complete, the 3 seconds when he considered completing it with his life instead of his training. 2 days later, German engineers will reinforce the damaged supports with timber and steel, restoring the bridge to limited operational status. A week after that, American artillery will finally finish what McNiece's explosives began, dropping the entire span into the river through methodical bombardment from positions his partial success helped establish. But the official citation will read differently, emphasizing tactical innovation and heroic initiative under fire. The story that survives in unit histories will compress that morning into clean narrative lines: mission assigned, obstacles overcome, objective achieved through superior American determination and demolition expertise. McNiece signs the after-action report without reading it twice, knowing that military documentation serves different purposes than memory. The bridge fell eventually, the mission succeeded in its broader context, and 12 scattered paratroopers accomplished something approaching their assigned objective despite scattered drops and inadequate resources. What the reports won't mention is those 3 seconds when failure felt so personal that death seemed like reasonable payment for incomplete success. What they can't capture is the weight of command decisions made by men barely old enough to vote, in circumstances no training manual could anticipate. That night, sharing a bottle of liberated Calvados with the surviving members of his squad, McNiece listens to them retell the morning's action with growing embellishment. Already the story is becoming cleaner, more heroic, more complete than the messy reality they actually lived through. He doesn't correct their version. Stories serve purposes that facts sometimes can't, and these men need heroes more than they need honest acknowledgement of tactical ambiguity and partial success. 43 years after Pont du Phars, Jake McNiece sits in his Oklahoma kitchen, listening to a freight train cross the steel bridge that carries the Santa Fe line over the Canadian River. The sound always brings it back, not the explosion or the gunfire, but the metallic groan of damaged steel accepting weight it wasn't designed to bear. His grandson Tommy, 17 and earnest, spreads photocopied pages across the kitchen table. School project on World War II heroes, focusing on paratroopers and the Filthy 13. The boy has found McNiece's name in 3 different books, each telling slightly different versions of that June morning in Normandy. "Grandpa, this one says you single-handedly destroyed a crucial bridge under heavy enemy fire, but this other book says you damaged it enough to delay German armor for 6 days. Which one's right?" McNiece studies the printed pages, noting how his morning of uncertainty and partial success has been transformed into clean narrative lines suitable for high school textbooks. Both versions are technically accurate. Neither captures the 3 seconds when he considered finishing the job with grenades and desperation. "Probably both," he says finally. "War's messier than books make it sound. Sometimes you accomplish the mission in ways nobody planned for." The freight train's whistle echoes across the Oklahoma prairie, carrying freight toward destinations McNiece will never see. The sound used to wake him in the small hours, back when the dreams were frequent and vivid. Now it's just part of the landscape, like arthritis in his knees and the persistent tremor in his left hand that developed sometime in the 1970s. Tommy reads aloud from one of the books, his young voice giving weight to words McNiece has heard before at reunions and ceremonies. Staff Sergeant McNiece's tactical innovation and heroic initiative exemplify the finest traditions of American airborne forces. His successful completion of the demolition mission, despite scattered forces and limited resources, directly contributed to Allied success in establishing the Normandy beachhead. "Sounds impressive when you put it that way," McNiece observes. "But what was it really like? I mean, what were you thinking when you ran toward that bridge?" McNiece considers several possible answers, each containing different proportions of truth and comfort. He could talk about training taking over, about tactical necessity overriding fear, about the clear-minded calculation that guides successful demolition operations. All of those responses would satisfy Tommy's project and support the clean, heroic narrative that history prefers. Instead, he finds himself describing the weight of the TNT satchel against his back, the way detonation cord feels when you're measuring it by the foot, the sound German voices make when they're coordinating defensive fire. Small, technical details that don't appear in citation language, but somehow contain more truth than broader generalizations about heroism and success. "Were you scared?" Tommy asks. "Terrified," McNiece admits, "but not of dying. Scared of screwing up the job, letting down the men who depended on me to figure it out. That's different from being afraid of bullets." The distinction matters, though McNiece isn't sure his grandson understands why. Fear of death is personal and manageable. Fear of failure when other lives depend on your competence is something heavier, more persistent, harder to rationalize away with talk of duty and patriotism. The books on Tommy's table contain photographs from McNiece's service, formal portraits, unit group shots, images of awards ceremonies that occurred years after the events they commemorated. In one picture, a young Staff Sergeant McNiece stands beside a table displaying demolition equipment, his expression serious beneath the battered helmet that appears in several wartime photographs. What the pictures can't show, is how that helmet felt after 48 hours without sleep, or the way composition explosive smells when it's been carried too long in Norman summer heat, or the exact color of dawn light filtered through smoke and cordite residue above a bridge that refuses to fall down completely. "Think I'll ever do anything that important?" Tommy asks. McNiece considers the question seriously, remembering his own 17-year-old certainty that real life was something that happened to other people in distant places. The boy has grown up in peacetime Oklahoma, his biggest challenges involving college applications and part-time jobs rather than tactical demolition under fire. "Hope not," McNiece says finally. "You hope you never have to find out what you're capable of when everything's falling apart and people are depending on you to improvise solutions nobody trained you for." The freight train's rumble fades toward the eastern horizon, leaving behind the familiar quiet of rural Oklahoma evening. Tommy gathers his research materials, satisfied with quotes that will give substance to his report on American heroes and their contributions to Allied victory. After the boy leaves, McNiece remains at the kitchen table, listening to the silence that follows passing trains. The bridge at Pont-du-Phars was rebuilt after the war, he's been told. Modern concrete and steel carrying French traffic across the same river, where 12 scattered paratroopers once fought a brief, confused action whose importance was clearer in retrospect than it felt at the time. Sometimes he wonders what became of the German soldiers who defended that crossing, whether they carried their own version of that morning forward into peacetime lives that had to accommodate memories of young Americans who appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly, leaving behind damaged bridges and stories that would be told differently depending on who survived to tell them. If this story reminded you that behind every medal and mission report there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.